What's up, guys? This is Nick Bell, your local product specialist from Line 6. Unfortunately, on October 6th, we learned of the passing of one of, in my opinion, one of the most influential guitar players since Hendrix. And so, very sad day it was, but I thought it'd be a cool opportunity, I guess, to just kind of go over how I've gotten an Eddie Van Halen sound. We've done this a couple times on different Helix user groups, such as the Chad Boston Helix family user group. So haven't done one on this side of things, so should be pretty fun. Let's take a look. I'd like to start off by taking a look at kind of a PowerPoint, if you will, these tone templates that we put together. This is an updated one of Eddie Van Halen here. And so I'd just like to take a quick gander at what he's using, and then using Pod Go, I'm going to show how I get this kind of a sound. And it works pretty well with me. For me, different guitar players, I'm sure, are gonna put their 2 cents in and have different opinions on maybe what he did or didn't use. But honestly, guys, with this preset, you just dial it into your playing, into your playing style, and you'll be pretty surprised how you will get there. So looks like we have Doc Brown in the chat. Hi, Doc. How you doing? So again, guys, if you have any questions about Pod Go, Eddie Van Halen, even if it's a question that has nothing to do with Van Halen, please let us know. We have product specialists in the chat ready to answer your questions. But let's just get on into it. So taking a look here, we're looking at pretty much the rig that you would find with Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Diver Down, Fair Warning. Of course, Ed is known for always changing necks on his guitars, different bodies, different pickups. So, of course, these tones have definitely changed throughout the different albums, but really taking this type of a template, take away some gain, you're pretty much going to nail almost any Van Halen tone. If you're looking for some Van Hagar, throw some chorus on it and you're good. So taking a look, what Ed pretty much was using here, as we know, is the Flanger, his Phase 90, and then we see 2 delay units here. The Maestro EP3, this was, you would hear this in things such as Ain't Talking About Love, Woman in Love from the first 2 albums. And believe it or not, there is actually a slapback delay on Ain't Talking About Love, and he just has literally just a 16th note single repeat slapback, and so that was responsible for the Maestro EP3. Now, looking over at the Panasonic EC80 from the research that I've been able to do, it seems like this was only used for live situations, such as his guitar solo being Eruption, and that's actually the delay unit you hear at the end of the recording, and he literally would just go over to the feedback and time and move those knobs around and get some pretty cool sounds. Now, taking a look here, we have his Marshall model in 1959, and there is a lot of literature out there, lots of interviews with Ed on what he did, who he hooked up with, who modded his amp, and you get down the line wondering, what's true, what isn't, because Ed was known for steering people in the wrong direction or giving credit to certain people so they can, kind of get their amp business or, their amp mod business kind of up and running off the ground. But pretty much, we're going to be using a model of a 1959 Marshall with a greenback with 25 watt selections. That's what's in my preset. Ed is actually known for loading 20 watt greenback selections into his cabinet, giving him only an 80 watt cab. And it all has to do with volume. We'll talk about that in a moment. But after his amp, you see this LA2A studio compressor. Now, this is what he would run his amp into in the studio. Now, if you think about Ed's tone, it's almost cleaner than it is distorted, if you will. You could hear practically every note in the chords that he's playing, and a lot of it comes from this LA2A. His Marshall wasn't that distorted, but when you hear it through the LA2A, you're really able to just, add a lot more gain to that incoming signal. And then finally, some plate reverb. Now, in my tone, I put the LA2A in front of the amp, and I push the preamp in Pod Go. Now, for some of you, you may like the LA2A after the amp. For me, I like it in front of the amp. So definitely mess around with that when we start getting into our tone. But the big takeaway here with Ed's tone would be his amp and his cab, right? So we see this little guy on top of that Marshall head, and that would be a variac. And so Ed's whole idea was about getting a great sounding tone, but not so loud he's going to, blow the sound guy away. So taking a look at the variac that he would use, this is a lot like the variac that Ed would use. And I have a little quote here from the Smithsonian interview that he did, and he says, depending on the room we were playing, I would set it anywhere between 60 and 100 because the only way the amp sounded good was with everything all the way up. So that became my volume knob. If we were playing little bars, I'd set it to like 60 volts. Somewhere a little bit bigger, I'd crank it up to 80. And for recording, the sweet spot seemed to be 89 volts. So you'll notice with an amp like a Marshall, wanting 120 out of, 110 to 120 out of the wall, if you take it down to all the way to 60, even 89 volts here, you create a what we call sag. You are sagging the amp, and what ends up happening is Ed was just wanting a quieter amp. He wanted all that good tone anywhere he was going, and he would just control the volume via the variac. But then what he found out was there was a lot of other cool things that happen. When you sag an amp, the amp works harder. When the amp works harder, you get more gain. Also, what's interesting is since he was turning down the voltage, it made the reaction or, the reaction from the amp a lot looser. The response was a lot looser, and also had a much spongier sound, a much spongier pick attack, if you will. Awesome. Looking over here at the comments, doing good. Great. So as you can see with Pod Go, we can definitely do this. Now, this is kind of the sound I have already going here, and we'll build this from the ground up. But just to give us a quick little, look-see, we could do all sorts of different tones. We got, freaking, what is this one right here? You can hear that and really feel that loose reaction, and I'll show you how we get that. We'll be dialing in his flanger. So let's have some fun here, guys. So taking a look, I'm going to go to a blank preset because it's always fun to see how we get there from the ground up, right? So again, guys, before I get any further, any questions you have, feel free to, ping the guys in the group and they will definitely help you out. So taking a look, guys, I like to start off with the amp. The amp I'm going to be using today is going to be the Brit Plexi Bright. So let's take a look down here. Where are you at? Right there. So we're going to click the Brit Plexi Bright. And so right off the bat, when it comes to adjusting the parameters, like Ed said, I always like to start kind of, turning things up all the way. And so drive, I crank. Can you do this on Pod XT Live? Yeah, you could definitely do it on Pod XT Live, Rick. The Pod XT, I believe, has a variac Marshall modeled, so check that one out, and you'll have some fun. But like I said, guys, really simple. Just like reading the Smithsonian interview and really any other interview from the 80s with Ed, he always talks about how he would crank all of his, all of his parameters up to 10. Now, since we are, in the digital realm here, and depending on the kind of speakers you're playing through, cranking the presence and the treble may be a little too much. So that's why I kind of leave the treble and the presence kind of around this area, around the 8s or, around the 8s or, high 7s, because depending, like I said, depending who I'm playing with, where I'm playing, these will definitely move around. It looks like I'm seeing some stuff coming in on the blurry video. Sorry to hear about that, guys. Maybe it's an internet connection somewhere. Can't see anything. Let's see what's going on here. Is everyone reporting a blurry video? Let's see. Looks like we have some blurs here, brown out. All right. Well, we'll just go on with it. The show must go on. Sorry about the horrible video, guys. Not sure why that is. Let's see here real quick. Just going to check to make sure we're looking good with, Sorry, guys, not much I can do on that. So moving on from there, guys, like I said, we kind of just crank everything up. Again, channel volume is going to be dependent on, you know, your leveling and such. But then now we get into these master volume or these power amp controls, if you will. So taking a look over here, I like to call these power amp controls field controls. Because really, even though they're the power amp controls, they really control a lot of the feel. So when I'm looking over at Pod Go and I have my channel volume or master volume, you may wonder, some of you may wonder, you know, what do I use when it comes to adjusting my volume? Well, we want to use our channel volume to adjust the volume, not the master. Because the master volume is talking to, or actually controls, the output transformer. And what we have here is adjust how hard the power amp is working. A higher master volume equals more power amp saturation. So we're going to make that up to 10. So we have that full saturation. Now, we were talking about sag and Ed using a variac. Well, what we have here is a higher sag means a more spongy feel and a looser response. A lower sag means a tighter response. So taking a look here, sag right at 50, that means that this amp where it was modeled, that is its optim level right there. But if we want to kind of hone in on what Ed was doing, we're going to want to turn this up. So by cranking up the sag, what this is doing, it's essentially recreating what Ed was doing when he was plugging his Marshall into a variac and cranking it down to about 89 volts. So what I do here, I like to bring this up to about around 9, as close as possible. And so this will definitely help with the reaction or the feel of the amp to have more of that looser feel. Now, it may be hard to hear it, through this type of a setting. But if you have Pod Go or Helix at home, definitely crank up the sag. You'll be pretty surprised at how much of a looser response you get, and it really helps nailing that brown sound. So taking a look from there, we have hum, which is just recreating 60 cycle heater hum. And then that gets us down to ripple, bias, and bias excursion. So bias, if any of us here, which I'm sure most of us have been familiar with tube amps, and as you know, when you get new tube amps, you have to get the amp rebias. Here in the digital world, we get to do all sorts of stuff when it comes to bias. Now, when you look at an amp like a Marshall, it's a Class AB design, the power amp. Now, with a Class AB power amp design, it has a resting stage, and it also has its apex where it's outputting 100% of the time when you're hitting those big chords and the volume of the guitar is turned up all the way. However, when you turn down, and you're doing, it's just really light picks of the hand and such, the power amp starts to rest. Now, in Helix, in Pod Go, in this modeling, if we turn up the bias, what we're doing is we're actually removing the resting state of the amp. And so you can actually make a Marshall sound a little more brittle, make it sound a little more like a Vox. And that's why we have it written here. A higher bias means a less resting stage for the amp. So some have heard that Ed has rose his bias on some amps, and that's how he got certain, tones to be a little more distorted. For me, I've been totally fine with just leaving the bias right around 5 to 7, and that's been really good for me. Now, bias excursion, what we have written here, is bias excursion determines how the power amp tube's voicings react when pushed hard, controlling how much the bias changes when the amp is driven with a loud or really high master volume. So, when it comes to bias X, I recommend to turn this down to tighten up your low end. Now, if we're using the same amp and we want a more vintage type of a sound, maybe a looser, low-end, flubbier sound, more kind of like what we would get maybe with like a Tweed amp in the Eagles, I would crank up this bias excursion and kind of loosens up that low end, giving it a more vintage type of sound. But when it comes to Ed's sound and dialing this in, I've noticed that turning down bias X really tightens up that low end. And when you're doing songs like Somebody Get Me a Doctor, where you can really hear that low end from his amp, it just really helps me get there even more so. And then finally, guys, we have ripple. Now, ripple is a characteristic of the output transformer that when the amp is pushed really, really hard, such as a Marshall, extra current is created, and that extra current gets stored in different areas of the amp. And so when this is happening, a lot of cool stuff, or just a lot of cool tones come out of the amp. And when you think of guys like Warren D. Martini, George Lynch, these are all guys that would talk about how when their tubes are dying, when their tubes are about to blow and they need a replacement, that's when their amps sound the best. And I've found the feel and the rumble and girth of the tone increases when I raise the ripple. And I'll raise the ripple to around 8 or 9. Like I said, it's really responsive to a high master volume setting. If you were to use this same amp, same settings, but turn the master volume down, you may not hear much coming from that ripple. So sorry about how terrible the video quality is, guys. We're going through this thing called StreamYard, and so to send us out to multiple places, and so I'm sorry to hear about that, guys. So moving on from there, is the cabinet. So we have a lot of great hybrid cabs in Helix, but when it comes to Ed's sound, he had a lot of stuff going on in the studio thanks to Ted Templeman. And so what I like to do is actually change this out to an impulse response. And so what's really cool about the impulse responses we have is that these were actually captured with Dan Bull from 65 Amps. And Dan Bull practically hung out with these guys, with the brothers back in the day. So I really enjoyed how he created this impulse response, because he kind of used a lot of the same techniques and ideas that the guys in LA did in the 70s and 80s, getting us these classic tones that we love today. So right off the bat, guys, we have our Brit Plexi Bright. EQ stack is turned to 10 except for treble and presence. We adjusted our sag, our ripple and bias, as well as our bias excursion. Oh, cranked that up on accident. So let's hear what we got so far. So a pretty dry, really dry sound. And so definitely needs some work. So moving on over, I'm going to go straight to my last effect, and we're going to add reverb. So the reverb you can hear on practically every single Van Halen album was plate reverb. And so for the plate reverb, again, depending on the speakers you're using, the playing scenario that you're in general, these settings will change. But for my current situation, what has been working well is setting the decay to 4.7. So think of decay as the size of the room. More decay, a bigger room. Now, pre-delay is actually going to increase a lot. And so this is how Ed's reverb almost sounds like there's literally like a delay to his reverb. And so what they did back in the day, they would use delays and such, at least for when Hendrix was doing this kind of thing. They actually had to run their sound into a delay unit before going into the reverb tank. But in the late 70s, early 80s and stuff, we started seeing things such as pre-delay. So the pre-delay is actually going to delay my signal from 140 seconds before it hits the reverb, and that's a huge element when it comes to dialing in his reverb. The low cut, I'm going to raise this up to 180 so we don't get a lot of low end reflections. Too many low end reflections can definitely muddy and make your sound a little more muddy. And then the high cut, I'm probably just going to keep that around 4.6. And then the mix, like I said, this will change for you guys. We're going to put this to 34. Let's hear the kind of sound that we have. All right, so we're getting there, not too bad. So now that that's set up, taking a look at the high and low cut kind of reminded me that I didn't adjust the low cut on our cabinet. So with any cabinet I'm using, even third-party impulse responses, I like to relieve about 40 to 60 hertz of the low cut, only because that kind of helps the low end sound tighter and not muddy. So we kind of have a cool sound already, not too bad. Let's see what we got. All right, so still a pretty clean sound, and we're at 100% for the drive, so you can see where this LA2A is going to come into play. So one of the first additions I'm going to do before the amp will be the addition of the LA2A, and you're going to notice right off the bat that there is a big tone difference here. So we're going to do the LA2A studio compressor, and then the gain, sometimes I keep it right where it's at 6.2, sometimes I'll raise it to about 7. Now, if you move this to after the amp, be careful because it really boosts your input signal or output signal if it's after the amp. So what I'm going to do real quick, since we're building this tone, I'm going to turn on the input gate, and then I'm going to leave the decay at 500 milliseconds because we don't want the gate to close too soon on us and make us sound choppy. And so this is how I just dial in a noise gate. Perfect. All right. So now that we have our LA2A, I'm just going to raise it to 7, leave all the other parameters where they're at, and then now let's hear the kind of sound that we have. No, not too bad. Roll down the volume even, and it's still clean. Of like the rhythm section of Beautiful Girls. Sorry, got a little ahead of myself there. So as you can see, so far we're there. We're sounding pretty darn good, at least to my ears. So now let's add in, some more effects that Ed is, known for using. So first off, since we got this empty slot here, drum roll please, script mod phase. So this is our model of a phase 90, and the reason why it's the script mod phase is because if you think of the old, school MXRs from back in the day, how they were written in script, that's why we call it our script mod phase. So the default settings right out of the box are good, except for the rate. So what I recommend for my settings, my ears, I like to drop this to 0.9. That to me sounds right on the money on what he was doing, because his phase is definitely slower than it is faster. So taking a look, if we turn on the phase 90, it greatly gets us into Eddie Van Halen territory. So forth. So that is definitely the the setting that works for me. So we'll turn this guy off, and then finally, let's bring in a flanger. So don't want it after the amp, so we're going to put it in front of the amp. Go to modulation, and then we're looking for the gray flanger, and this is literally a model of a vintage flanger. And so what the settings here that I've definitely spent some time trying to figure out is pretty funny. I never knew they were these just straight up 40 40 40 40 and 100 until a couple of years ago. So really all you do for the flanger, guys, if you want to get in Eddie Van Halen territory, even if you have the actual flanger, keep in mind the newer flangers today from MXR, they're digital. They're on printed circuit board, and so a printed PC board, if you will. So definitely, it's not gonna be the same in regards to settings when you go from a complete analog unit to something new today. So these settings may differ, but like I said, literally everything goes to 4/4, and then literally we'll put this guy to 10. And then the spread we'll keep right there. 1 4 4 10 4 4 4 10. And then this guy for the spread, we'll do 0 actually. And then the mix, we'll keep it where it's at. And so now, let's hear the kind of sound that we have. We could, hell, let's try Unchained. All right, let's see how this. Not too bad. Ain't Talking About Love. Having some fun. So pretty much, guys, this is my Eddie Van Halen preset. Really simple. The impulse response I'm using, if I didn't mention already, is from the free Allure pack. This is where you could go to line6.com/Allure. These are created in-house over at Line 6 with Dan Bulla 65 amps. And like I said, literally all, instead of making steak at home, let's go out to Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and here it is. That's it in this impulse response. The work is already done for you. And like I said, it's free. Keep in mind, if we go on down here in the editor, I can actually go to get more IRs. And over at our marketplace, we have impulse responses directly from Celestion and all the other greats, for you to, utilize when you're recreating popular tones. So like I said, for me, the slam dunk has been this greenback. I'll make sure to share and upload this tone on our custom tone, so you guys could definitely download this for your Podgo. Just make sure to get the impulse response. If you don't get this impulse response from us, you won't have you won't have this awesome tone. So like I said, guys, that's my Eddie Van Halen tone. If you have any questions, feel free to just type them on into the chat window. This video is going to be living up on our website for a while. Or on Facebook, if you will. So like I said, let us know if you have any questions. Momentarily, I'll be posting the tone from our custom tone website. And without further ado, thank you guys so much. That was a lot of fun. I hope it was informative. Sorry to hear about all the terrible video quality. And so let's see here if I can. If you guys want that impulse response, it's www.line6.com/Allure. So I'm sending in that website now. Just go there, you type in your email address, and you'll get an email immediately from us with that free pack. And it has everything from the one I was using today. You have some for Fender, Vox, Mesa Boogie with a Vintage 30, and so on and so forth. But hope that was fun, guys. That's my Eddie Van Halen preset. Rest in peace, EVH. And we will see you guys at the next stream. Next week, I believe we have Tony Campanovo, so make sure to check that out. He'll definitely be melting some faces as he does. So thank you guys. Take care.